Followed the morning sun. A stiff wind funneled through the streets, yanking at flags hoisted atop the neoclassical buildings lining Pennsylvania Avenue. It was the kind of day that made Washington feel even more like itself, a place where power was wielded with a firm handshake and a sharpened knife, and where every storm, literal or political, was met with cameras, commentary, and controversy. Down by the east entrance of the U.S. Capitol, the media circus had already pitched its tent. Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, OANN, even international networks, all were crammed along the barricades, their anchors in trench coats, faces taut with urgency. The words high-profile hearing and potential criminal charges had a way of setting the press corps on fire. Today's main event? A congressional investigation into one of the most egregious leaks of federal law enforcement intelligence in recent history. ICE, the embattled agency tasked with enforcing immigration laws, had been running highly classified operations to arrest violent, illegal gang members and human traffickers. Yet time and time again, suspects had vanished minutes before ICE arrived, as if tipped off in real time. The evidence pointed to a leak from inside the federal government, an official who had compromised national security to protect illegal migrants. And today, under the grand dome of the Capitol, the hunt for that traitor began. Inside, past the towering columns and under the rotunda, the real storm was gathering. The House Oversight and Reform Committee was set to convene one of the most politically explosive hearings in years. The chamber was a furnace of tension. At the front, the dais was lined with lawmakers, their faces ranging from stone-cold determination to barely disguised irritation. The seating arrangement revealed the divide as clearly as the red and blue of their party affiliations. On the right, the Republicans sat like a wall of steel, expressions firm, ready for war. On the left, the Democrats looked either unconcerned or ready to spin this into another political spectacle. The hum of whispers filled the air. Spectators lined the gallery, journalists clutched their notepads, and committee aides scurried between desks. Every microphone was hot. Every camera was rolling. Then, Tom Homan walked in. The former acting ICE director was not a man who minced words, nor was he the type to blink in the face of political theater. He was a lawman, through and through, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, a presence that commanded respect whether you liked him or not. He had spent decades on the front lines of border enforcement, staring down cartel traffickers, gang enforcers, and bureaucratic red tape alike. Today, though, his adversaries weren't criminals from the southern border. They were sitting across the room, draped in political power and righteous indignation. At the opposite end of the chamber, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat with her arms crossed, flipping through a thick stack of documents. She didn't even glance up as Homan entered, but her fingers tapped idly against the table. She knew the cameras would be on her soon enough. She was ready for the show. To her right, Ilhan Omar leaned in, whispering something to Dan Goldman, who frowned and nodded. Their row was a fortress of progressive ideology, a group that had spent the last week dismissing this hearing as right-wing fear-mongering. But today, they weren't the ones controlling the gavel. A sudden rap echoed through the chamber as Chairman Jim Jordan adjusted his microphone and cleared his throat. The low murmur of conversation ceased in an instant. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jordan began, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had spent years exposing government corruption. "We are gathered here today because there is credible evidence that a federal official leaked classified ICE operation plans to activist groups, potentially even criminal networks." A pause, a glance across the room. This act of betrayal allowed violent offenders, many with felony records, to evade capture, directly compromising public safety. And today, we're going to find out who is responsible. The words landed like a hammer. In the front row, a journalist furiously typed on his laptop. AOC, still flipping through her notes, finally looked up. Across from her, Tom Homan exhaled slowly, watching, waiting. "Mr. Homan," Jordan continued, turning his gaze toward the witness table, "you've spent years leading the men and women tasked with enforcing our immigration laws. In your experience, how dangerous is it when law enforcement operations are leaked?" Homan leaned forward, adjusting the microphone. The room braced. It was time to begin. The room was silent except for the faint rustle of papers and the low hum of the cameras recording every moment. All eyes turned toward the witness table as Tom Homan straightened in his chair. He had been here before, testified, clashed with politicians who had never spent a day in law enforcement, yet felt entitled to lecture him about it. But this time something was different. The stakes weren't just policy debates or partisan bickering. This was about a criminal breach of national security, and Homan wasn't about to let the moment slip into political theater. Jim Jordan leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Mr. Homan, you've spent decades enforcing immigration laws and leading ICE operations. Based on your experience, what happens when classified operations are leaked? Homan exhaled slowly, his voice steady but sharp. It's simple. People die. A few murmurs rippled through the room, but he didn't pause. Every time an ICE operation is sabotaged, we're not just talking about lost arrests. We're talking about violent criminals, gang members, cartel affiliates, human traffickers who get away. They don't just disappear. They go back into communities, continue their crimes, and put American citizens in danger. He shifted in his chair, scanning the committee. This isn't just hypothetical. It has already happened. A few screens lit up behind him as congressional staff pulled up reports, detailed records of ICE raids that had failed in the last 12 months due to preemptive leaks. Some of these failed raids involved MS-13 gang members, drug traffickers, and fugitives wanted for violent felonies. The correlation wasn't speculation, it was statistical proof of a deliberate effort to undermine law enforcement. He continued, his voice unwavering. We now know that these leaks aren't random. The Department of Justice has confirmed that someone inside the federal government, someone with access to classified ICE operations, has been tipping off these criminals before our teams arrive. Silence. Then, the inevitable interruption. Let's be honest about what's really happening here. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez cut in, shaking her head as she adjusted her microphone. ICE has a long history of targeting and terrorizing immigrant communities. And now you're sitting here trying to claim that enforcing immigration laws is about saving lives? She scoffed. Give me a break. Tom Homan did not even blink. No, he said firmly, his voice slicing through the tension like a blade. This isn't about immigration. It's about criminals. AOC leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Oh, sure. Because ICE never sweeps up innocent families or tears kids from their parents, right? Homan's gaze was like steel. We don't target families. We target criminals. We go after people with felony records, gang affiliations, active warrants. People who have already committed violent crimes, many of them repeat offenders. And yet, someone in our own government decided to protect those criminals instead of protecting the American people. A murmur of agreement rippled through the Republican side of the chamber. AOC opened her mouth, but before she could fire back, Jim Jordan held up a hand. Mr. Homan, are you telling this committee that there is direct evidence of a leak coming from within the government? Homan nodded. Yes, and it gets worse. Jordan tilted his head. How so? Homan turned toward the gallery. Bring in the next witness. The doors at the back of the chamber opened, and a special agent from the FBI stepped inside. His suit was crisp, his expression unreadable, but the folder in his hand said everything. He walked up to the stand, taking his seat beside Homan. The moment he introduced himself, the energy in the room shifted. My name is Special Agent Matthew Crowley, FBI Counterintelligence Division, he said into the microphone. Our office has been investigating this breach for the last 6 months, and what we've uncovered is deeply alarming. A few reporters scribbled furiously. Some Democrats shifted in their seats. We have evidence that classified ICE operations were deliberately leaked to outside groups and individuals, many of whom are actively engaged in coordinating evasion efforts for illegal migrants, including those with criminal records. He placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside this report are a series of encrypted messages and emails sent from a federal employee to various activist organizations. In these messages, we found direct warnings about upcoming ICE operations. The chamber erupted. Across the room, AOC's face hardened. Illan Omar leaned forward, whispering something to Dan Goldman, whose expression had gone tight. Jim Jordan slammed his gavel. Order! The room gradually quieted, though the tension now felt like a live wire. Crowley continued. We are currently conducting further analysis to determine exactly which government official was responsible. But make no mistake, this was no accident. This was a deliberate effort to obstruct law enforcement. A reporter in the back whispered to a colleague, if this holds, someone's going to prison. Jim Jordan sat back, exhaling. Then after a pause, he turned back toward Homan. Mr. Homan, what would be the consequences if this kind of leak continues? Homan didn't hesitate. More criminals go free. More Americans get hurt. It's that simple. AOC let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. Unbelievable, she muttered under her breath. Homan turned his gaze toward her. Yeah, it is. The lights dimmed slightly as the committee's AV technician queued up the next piece of evidence. The massive screen at the front of the chamber flickered to life, and the unmistakable face of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez filled the frame. It was a clip from her Instagram live stream, one of her many impromptu monologues where she spoke directly to her progressive base. In the video, she leaned forward, her expression fierce with conviction. Listen up, everyone. ICE is out there terrorizing communities, but you have rights. If they show up at your door, you don't have to open it. You don't have to speak to them. Know your rights. Do not cooperate. Resist. The video cut. Silence. Then, like an ember dropped into dry brush, the room ignited. Murmurs, scoffs, a few audible gasps from the public seating area. Pundits watching from cable news headquarters were already crafting their segment openers. AOC, always quick on the draw, barely let a breath pass before launching into full counterattack mode. Mr. Chairman, this is absurd, she snapped, pulling her microphone closer. That clip is completely out of context. I was advising immigrants on their legal rights. You all act like I was handing out getaway cars. She turned, gesturing dramatically with her hands. I refuse to apologize for protecting the vulnerable from cruel, inhumane policies that rip families apart. Tom Homan remained unmoved. If anything, he looked bored, like a man who had heard this exact speech too many times to count. He exhaled slowly, then turned his chair slightly to face her directly. His voice was low, steady, and sharp as a scalpel. Cruel, inhumane policies? He let the words hang for a beat. Tell me, Congresswoman, how many cartel members did you protect with that advice? How many human traffickers? How many fentanyl dealers? AOC's nostrils flared. That's not what this is about. No, it's exactly what this is about. Homan cut her off. His voice didn't rise, but it carried enough weight to stop her cold. You tell people to resist, to not cooperate, but you never bother to mention that we're not just knocking on random doors. We're going after criminals. He leaned forward, locking eyes with her. So I'll ask again, who exactly were you protecting? The hard-working immigrant? Or the guy with a warrant for child trafficking? The chamber went still. AOC clenched her jaw. I was advising communities. No, you were advising criminals. And they listened. They ran. And because of that, our agents walked into dead ends while dangerous people slipped through the cracks. The tension in the room thickened as the Republicans seized the momentum. A congressman from Texas, a former prosecutor, flipped through a folder and spoke up. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, let's clarify something. Did you or did you not distribute printed materials instructing illegal migrants on how to evade ICE? AOC rolled her eyes. I handed out information on constitutional rights, which is completely legal. A stack of color-printed flyers landed with a slap on the desk before her. The cover was clear as day. How to protect yourself from ICE, complete with Spanish translations and step-by-step instructions on refusing entry, refusing to answer, and how to delay deportation proceedings. It had her name printed right at the bottom. AOC stared at the document. For the first time, her mask slipped just slightly. Across the aisle, a few Republicans exchanged knowing looks. Someone coughed. Tom Homan simply folded his arms. Looks pretty clear to me. The committee room was tense as Special Agent Matthew Crowley took his seat, placing a thick file onto the table. Unlike the political grandstanding filling the chamber, FBI agents dealt in facts, not theatrics, and he had brought plenty of them. Agent Crowley, you've been investigating the source of the ICE leaks. What have you found? Jim Jordan asked. Crowley flipped open his file. Our investigation confirmed that classified ICE operations were leaked from within the federal government. A federal employee provided details about upcoming raids, which were then passed to outside activists and individuals working against ICE enforcement. A murmur swept through the room. Jordan leaned in. Do you know who received these leaks? Crowley nodded. Yes, the Department of Justice has identified at least one government employee under investigation, someone with direct ties to members of this committee. Silence. Then the final blow. One recipient of these leaks was the office of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. A sharp gasp cut through the room. AOC tensed, gripping the microphone. Oh, come on. You're really trying to turn a random message into some kind of, what, a conspiracy? Jordan stayed calm. Agent Crowley, was this an isolated case? Crowley slid another paper forward. We recovered multiple communications between this employee and activist groups, including messages saying, stay hidden. ICE is coming tomorrow morning. Homan, who had remained silent until now, uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. You know what we call this? He said, voice dangerously calm. AOC shot him a glare. Let me guess, treason? Homan didn't blink. Aiding and abetting criminals. The words hit like a hammer. Jordan gestured toward the screen. Congresswoman, do you recognize this email? A screenshot appeared, a forwarded email from a Democratic staffer, tipping off activists. AOC's eyes flicked to it, and back to Jordan.
I'm going to go over to
This
Irene's.
is ridiculous.
Okay.
Is it?
I'm going to take
Jordan
this.
smirked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks a lot like your office was helping illegal migrants evade ICE.
Please
AOC
don't post
crossed her
these
arms.
things.
No.
You're grasping at straws. Jordan shrugged.
Then what are you doing?
Then you won't mind answering some more questions on the road.
Come on, seriously.